These days I was remembering how good the old anime is, and because of that, I decided to bring this classic here for you, and if you like old anime, already leave your like down below and a comment to support us, and let us go straight to the video. This is the story of Lelouch, a boy who seeks revenge and wishes to dominate the world, besides that he obtains a special power in his eyes, which he intends to use to reach this goal. The anime begins showing Suzaku and Lelouch, still children, playing in a scenery almost like a fairy tale. At this moment, we see C2, a mysterious girl with green hair watching the two from the distance. Right. After that, a swarm of cicadas appears, and then we hear the voice of C2 narrating a striking event that changed the course of the world, the conquest of Japan. Thus, we realize that Lelouch and Suzaku witnessed the beginning of everything. And we also discover that Britannia introduced a new technology, piloted giant robots. They are incredibly powerful and capable of destroying with ease all Japanese weaponry, and with that, Japan ended up being defeated by the Empire. While Suzaku demonstrated sadness and a certain resignation in the face of the tragedy, Lelouch was taken by rage and swore to destroy the Empire of Britannia. 7 years later, in 2017, we see that Britannia had completely dominated the former Japan, and now it was renamed as Area 11. Only a small part of the Japanese resistance continued fighting, but it was classified as terrorist. Right after that, the television shows the military chasing a hijacked vehicle, reinforcing how the control and repression of Britannia are severe over the region. The propaganda broadcast on TV describes those rebels as mere bandits that threaten the order of the zone, and soon after the news shows other headlines. We then notice that this TV set is inside a room where a chess match has just ended. This match was between a conceited noble who boasts about having won this match, and at this moment, Lelouch enters the room together with his friend Rivals. He states that he can reverse the situation of the board in less than 9 minutes, and he begins the match. He moves the king and uses his intelligence to anticipate, a crucial point. In another scene at Ashford Academy, we see Millie, Nina, and Shirley talking about Lelouch's playing habits. Shirley disapproves the way he plays, and Millie, who is always playful, does not lose the chance to mock her face for having so much affection for Lelouch. Meanwhile, the story returns to focus on the group of rebels that we saw being chased by the military in the news. Inside the vehicle, a discussion happens between Nagata and Callan, because Nagata complains that the companions did not follow the planned strategy. Back to the chess, Lelouch manages to defeat his opponent, leaving the noble shocked for having been defeated so quickly. Rivals celebrates the victory of his friend and feels satisfied, since that man had a very arrogant and unpleasant attitude. As they leave the room, Rivals comments that in the end, the 11s, as the Japanese from Area 11 are called, and the citizens of Britannia are not so different after all. Shortly after, the two walk through the city and come across a giant screen, transmitting the news that soon the third Prince of Britannia will make a speech. It is then that the governor of Area 11, named Clovis, appears on television, addressing both the people of Britannia and the 11s. Meanwhile, we see again the young woman who drives the vehicle of the rebels. She is quite irritated and declares that they are not 11s, but indeed Japanese. While the escape continues, Clovis proceeds with his speech, stating that he will not tolerate the criminals who disturb the order and promising to eliminate them. Without hesitation, since he is fighting for justice and will do what is necessary to keep things as they are, and the speech comes to an end, and after the transmission, Clovis says goodbye in front of the cameras. But as soon as they turn off, we realize that he is in a luxurious party, and a woman approaches and comments that he is a great actor since his speech was very convincing. At this moment, Jeremiah appears, a military officer, bringing more news. Something serious has happened, and by all indications, a group of rebels managed to steal an extremely important shipment. Upon hearing this, Clovis immediately orders that all Nightmare pilots, who are those combat robots, be sent to recover the stolen cargo, which is now in the hands of the supposed terrorists. Soon we see Jeremiah and Violet boarding their Nightmares to execute the order, and meanwhile, through the streets, Rivals ends up unintentionally getting in the way of the rebels, causing an accident with his vehicle. The crowd quickly gathers around, but to the frustration of Lelouch, people seem more interested in blaming the involved ones and commenting on the event than really helping. Intrigued, Lelouch approaches to evaluate the situation, but ends up being surprised. He is dragged and thrown into the back of the rebels' truck, and at that moment Nagata shifts into high gear to try to escape, since he noticed that the Britannian military were chasing them, and Callan, upon realizing the risk, reassures her companions. She says that this is exactly the reason why she is there. Determined, she moves to the back of the truck, but is surprised by Lelouch's gaze, who finds her face familiar. Right after that, Callan uses the nightmare model glass glow to open a path during the escape. Lelouch then realizes that he is facing the dangerous rebels and that he ended up trapped inside their truck. During the chase, Callan managed to destroy most of the helicopters that were following them. However, Jeremiah appears in his Sutherland nightmare. This nightmare easily surpasses her glass glow, and amid the confusion, Nagata alerts the group, reminding them that if they are captured, the mission will fail. In the battle, Violette also appears, and amid the combat, Callan manages to detach the arm of the glass glow with a maneuver to try to escape Jeremiah's pressure. Meanwhile, in another point of the story, we see Bartley discussing with Cecily. They make it clear that the true intention of the military is not only to chase the rebels, but to track their hideouts and then exterminate them. In this dialogue, Cecily Chrome also appears, a blue-haired scientist who shows herself willing to help in the operation. Curious, Cecily asks Bartley what exactly had been stolen by the terrorists, and he replies that the rebels managed to steal a capsule containing a poisonous gas. This gas can be used against the Britannian army itself, and right after that, we see that the military began to send into the battlefield soldiers called honorary Britannians. They were recruited to try to recover the shipment. However, we also notice that Nagata is gravely injured due to Violette's previous attack, leaving the rebel group in an even more delicate situation. For this reason, Lelouch runs toward a barricade that prevents the truck from continuing its movement. At that moment, we discover that Suzaku, his childhood friend shown at the beginning of the story, is among the so-called honorary Britannians. Soon after, Suzaku finds a vehicle and ends up coming across Lelouch. Since our hero still did not fully understand what was happening, he mistakes him for one of the bandits, but Suzaku quickly recognizes his old friend and reveals his identity. A few seconds later, Nagata opens the stolen capsule and immediately Suzaku places the gas mask on Lelouch's face to protect him. But instead of gas, as everyone expected, from inside the capsule emerges C2, the mysterious green-haired girl we saw at the beginning. Before they could understand the situation, Suzaku's superiors appear and order him to kill Lelouch. When he refuses to carry out this mission, he is brutally shot in the back by his own allies, and at the same time, in his last moments, Nagata ends up sacrificing himself to detonate the truck, which gives a chance of escape for Lelouch and for C2. Meanwhile, Clovis, believing that the rebels are still alive, takes a cruel decision, ordering the mass execution of the entire Shinjuku ghetto. Men, women, and children are murdered indiscriminately in a terrible massacre. During the escape, when it seemed that Lelouch and C2 had managed to get away, the ring of a phone ends up revealing their location. Surrounded by the royal guard and about to die, C2 jumps in front of Lelouch and receives a fatal shot to the head. Convinced that his death was inevitable, Lelouch thinks of his sister Nunnally moments before his death. However, suddenly, C2, still alive in some way, holds his hand and proposes a contract. In exchange for fulfilling one wish, he would receive the so-called power of kings, and without hesitation, Lelouch accepts. Immediately, he awakens the Gias, and as he rises, he orders the enemy soldiers to take their own lives. Obeying blindly and with a smile on their faces, they put an end to their own lives, and thus we realize that Lelouch now possesses an extraordinary and frightening and extremely powerful ability. Shocked by what had just happened, Lelouch understands that he has obtained the tool necessary to fulfill his goal, which is to destroy Britannia and conquer the world. Soon after, we see Lelouch walking through the destroyed warehouse. He reflects on the power he received from C2 and tries to understand what he will do from now on. But his contemplation is interrupted by the arrival of the Sutherland nightmare. Inside it is Violette, who finds the bodies of the royal guard scattered across the ground. Intrigued, she asks what exactly had happened there, until finally she finds Lelouch alone at the place. She confronts him, questioning why he is there, but she does not receive a direct answer. At this instant, Lelouch tries to use his Gias to force her to leave her nightmare, but he realizes that his ability only works with direct eye contact. Skilled and improvising, Lelouch pretends to be a noble, and his acting is so convincing that Violette ends up stepping down from the robot. At that moment, Lelouch manages to look into her eyes and uses the Gias to force her to hand over the activation keys of the nightmare. Thus, for the first time, Lelouch conquers the control of a war robot, marking the beginning of his true revolution. After that, we see Lloyd awakening Suzaku, who had been attended after being shot by the Royal Guard itself. Right after, Cecile reveals that the pocket watch he carried with him deflected the bullet and ended up saving his life. Then Lloyd asks Suzaku if he wishes to pilot a new experimental robot, and immediately the scene changes again to the Shinjuku ghetto, where the Britannian army is massacring the 11s, and Kallen, still piloting her glass glow, fights to protect the Japanese trying to escape, while Ugi and the other members of the resistance also risk everything to defend them. Meanwhile, Lelouch analyzes the situation. With no possibility of requesting reinforcements, he decides to join the rebels to destroy the Britannian forces. Shortly after, Kallen is cornered by Jeremiah and by another officer of the Purist faction, leaving her in great danger. At this moment, Lelouch communicates with her and orders that she go to the west entrance. Although she hesitates at first, Kallen follows his instructions and then asks what she should do. Lelouch then commands her to jump over the train. She obeys, but even so, Jeremiah is not impressed. Using his Sutherland, he manages to stop the train and orders his subordinates to pursue the glass glow. However, Lelouch, with the nightmare he had stolen earlier, destroys the enemy unit, leaving everyone surprised. Jeremiah, confused, believes that it was a mistake of friendly fire, but soon realizes that his Sutherland had been taken by another pilot, and he charges into battle. To his misfortune, the situation is not in his favor, and seconds later, Kallen advances against Jeremiah, forcing him to retreat. Right after Ugi, other members of the resistance arrive, and she decides to follow Lelouch's orders, who begins to distribute several nightmares to the group, and under his command, the rebels manage to quickly dominate Clovis's troops, destroying one by one the Britannian units in the area. Desperate and furious, Clovis creates a new plan to eliminate the insurgents, and he sends a large number of soldiers to the region where he believes they are hiding. But to his misfortune, the rebels had already withdrawn, and at this moment, Lelouch orders Kallen to attack the supporting structures of the area, causing a great collapse of the ground. This collapse destroys the Britannian forces, and enraged for having been deceived, Clovis authorizes Lloyd to lead his newest creation, the robot Lancelot. And then we discover that the one who will be the pilot of the machine is Suzaku. He enters combat immediately, with impressive skill, defeating several rebel units, trying to put an end to the massacre. But at the same time, Lelouch receives information about this new nightmare, which is reducing his forces at a frightening speed. He begins to elaborate a new plan to counterattack, but Suzaku with the Lancelot easily dominates all the rebels. The Lancelot locates Lelouch, who was hidden and coordinating the entire operation in safety, and upon realizing that the new weapon is far too powerful, he decides to retreat. At this instant, Kallen puts herself in front to protect him, but she is defeated with ease, and her nightmare is so damaged that the automatic ejection system launches her out of the cockpit, preventing her from being killed in the confrontation. Seconds later, we see that Lelouch managed to escape from the building, but Suzaku, in his Lancelot, resumes chasing him. To try to get rid of him, Lelouch fires against the nearby buildings, creating debris to hinder the enemy robot. However, the Lancelot dodges easily, and even so, the pursuit takes another turn when Suzaku sees a woman and her child fallen in the rubble. Without thinking twice, he interrupts the hunt and abandons the target to save the innocents. Shortly after, the scene changes to Base G1, where Clovis coordinates the operations. Using a disguise of a Britannian soldier, Lelouch manages to infiltrate the place, using his power of Gias to manipulate a guard and pass through restricted areas of the base without raising suspicion. Meanwhile, Kallen, Ugi, and the rest of the rebel group hide inside a warehouse full of 11s, trying to escape from the military pursuit. They discuss about the mysterious voice that had been giving them orders during the battle, and Ugi questions why this person does not answer when they try to establish contact, which leaves everyone intrigued. The danger increases when the Britannian army locates their position and prepares to fire. But before the order is given, Clovis commands a ceasefire, which ends up saving the group's lives. Meanwhile, inside base G1, we discover that Lelouch had already reached Clovis's command room. He keeps him at gunpoint, demanding that he order the end of the attack. Nervous, Clovis tries to ease the tension with a joke, saying that his masked assailant could decide the next step with a game of chess. But instead of falling for the provocation, Lelouch responds that they actually used to play chess together when they were young, in a place called Ares Villa. This memory leaves Clovis completely confused, since only members of the imperial family knew that location. It is then that Lelouch reveals his true identity. He is in fact Prince Lelouch Vix Britannia. Shocked, Clovis cannot believe it, since it was said that his younger brother had died years earlier, during the invasion of Japan. But Lelouch confirms with conviction that he survived, and that he is here to change everything. Next, we see the Shinjuku ghetto devastated by the massacre, and two Britannian soldiers still talking to each other, since they were very confused by the ceasefire order that had been given, and at the same time, Callan and Ugi, along with other survivors, are escorted out of the battle zone. The soldiers then realize that Clovis had been left alone in base G1, and inside the room, Lelouch continues pointing the gun at him. Clovis, relieved to see that his brother is still alive, even shows genuine happiness, and goes as far as to suggest that they could return to Britannia together. But that is not an option for Lelouch. He makes it clear that he will never allow himself to be used as a political tool. Lelouch stares at Clovis, making it clear that he will not be a puppet of the imperial family. Then, he begins to talk about the greatest trauma of his life, which is the death of his mother, Marianne. The scene shifts to a flashback, where we see the day Marianne was assassinated. We also see Nunnally, still a child who witnessed the crime up close, being deeply scarred by the event. Back in the present, Lelouch accuses the imperial family of being involved in the tragedy, claiming that they manipulated everything to make it look like the work of the rebels, when in fact, it was something else. Terrified, Clovis desperately denies any involvement, but Lelouch uses the Gias to force him to say everything he knows. Unfortunately, Clovis does not have many answers, but he only reveals that Schneisel and Cornelia know the truth about the case. Realizing this, Lelouch decides to end the interrogation. However, after a few seconds, he pulls the trigger and executes Clovis without mercy. The next morning, life apparently goes on as if nothing had happened, and we see Lelouch at school, gathered with his classmates from the student council. Millie smacks his head and tells him to wake up, since he was dozing off during the meeting, and right after, Rivald starts questioning him, curious to know what happened after he left him the night before. But before he can answer, Millie interrupts him, saying that they need to focus on the council's budget discussion. Between laughter and teasing, Millie makes a joke about Shirley, complimenting her well-proportioned and blushing figure, and Shirley reacts by calling her a pervert. Shortly after, Nina, Millie, Shirley, and Rivals join other students who are watching the news about the Shinjuku events. The news report claims that the terrorists released a poisonous gas during the attack, but provides no other details. At this moment, Lelouch begins to reflect silently, suspecting that Britannia is hiding important information about what happened, and then we get another flashback, where we see Lelouch holding the gun before Clovis, confirming that he really killed him. And the weight of this memory haunts him, making him feel nauseous and almost vomit. He quickly runs to the bathroom to pull himself together, and meanwhile, somewhere else, we see Violetta and Jeremiah inside a car, discussing Clovis's assassination. They wonder how the criminal managed to breach imperial security so many times without being caught, raising even greater suspicions about who is truly behind all of this. That night, the two continue reflecting, commenting on the possibility that everything happening might just be an excuse for Britannia to concentrate even more power. Back at school, Lelouch enters the classroom and is surprised to see Callan returning to her activities, after supposedly being very ill. At that moment, he realizes that Callan was not just his classmate, but also the same terrorist he had seen the day before fighting against Britannia. Right after, Rivals comments to him that the red-haired girl suffers from many health problems and comes from an aristocratic family, something that leaves Lelouch quite intrigued, since he had seen her fiercely fighting heavily armed soldiers. Later, we see Callan having lunch with 3 other girls when suddenly a bee appears and they all run away scared. Callan also runs, but hides behind a bush. However, instinctively, she uses her combat reflexes to swat the insect. At that moment, she mutters out loud that it's hard to keep her abilities hidden. Lelouch shows up shortly after and activates his Gias, confirming that Callan was indeed part of the rebel group. He interrogates her and discovers that she is a half-blood, half-Japanese and half-Britannian. Meanwhile, Shirley watches from the window, feeling worried about the scene. After a few more questions, Lelouch is satisfied and walks away. But then he reconsiders and decides to use his Gias again to make sure. Callan wouldn't tell anyone. His attempt fails. However, and she begins to grow suspicious of him, asking her own questions. Lelouch is cornered and doesn't even know how to react until Shirley shouts from the window, calling them back to class. Taking advantage of the distraction, he quickly escapes. And that night at home, Nunnally and Sayoko are waiting for him, folding delicate paper cranes. Shortly after, Lelouch arrives and they dine together, and during the meal, Nunnally reveals her wish for a kinder world. This makes Lelouch think about the future, and he promises to create a world where they can both live happily. They seal the moment with a pinky swear, vowing never to lie to each other. The next day, by the riverside, Lelouch decides he will explore all the possibilities of his newfound power. He tests the Gias on one of his teachers and discovers that he can only use it once on each person. Meanwhile, Callan talks with Oogie about the difficulties of continuing at school. He advises her to stay at least until things calm down. Even so, the two recall the mysterious masked leader who helped them in Shinjuku. Callan begins to suspect that it might be Lelouch, and at the same time, Lelouch fears she is on to him. After classes, Lelouch approaches Callan and asks to talk in private. Hearing this, Shirley is shocked, since she had never seen him show any interest in the redhead before. Meanwhile, the series cuts to Bartley, standing beside Clovis's coffin. At that moment, Jeremiah and the other nightmares attack the convoy, forcing Bartley to retreat. Back at school, Lelouch and Callan enter the student council room, but before they can talk, they are interrupted by the others, who formally welcome Callan as the newest member. During the celebration, Rivaltz shows up with a champagne bottle and tries to open it. Shirley tries to stop him, but the bottle ends up in Lelouch's hands. The pressure makes the cork pop and fly, spraying the liquid directly onto Callan, soaking her completely in front of everyone. As Callan takes a shower to clean herself after the incident, Lelouch lends her some clothes to wear, and before he can leave, she asks him to hand her a small pink purse that was on the counter. He agrees without questioning and gives her the purse. However, as soon as he turns back to look at her, Callan firmly grabs his arm and demands that he confess everything he knows about the Shinjuku events. Calmly, Lelouch feigns ignorance, and suspicious, Callan pulls out a small dagger hidden inside the pink purse. At that moment, a phone rings nearby. Lelouch answers and then hands it to Callan, since the person on the other end wanted to speak directly with her. On the line, the voice introduces itself as Zero, claiming to be the mysterious man who helped during the Shinjuku battle. He asks Callan to go to Tokyo Tower in 2 days, which makes her conclude that she had been completely mistaken in suspecting Lelouch. The mood lightens, and in a sarcastic tone, Lelouch jokes that he saw her naked during the shower. Callan blushes with embarrassment as she realizes it, quickly closing the shower curtain, while Lelouch leaves the bathroom. We soon discover that the voice on the phone was not a third party, but rather a scheme planned by Lelouch. It was Sayoko who played the role of Zero to deceive Callan. Later, the two walk together, talking about student council duties, until they enter a room where a news broadcast is being aired. It is then that they hear the shocking announcement. Clovis has been executed, and the culprit has been identified. They said it was Suzaku, Lelouch's childhood friend, and on the following day, all the students of Ashford Academy took part in a ceremony in honor of Clovis. Meanwhile, Lloyd and Cecile argue among themselves, acknowledging that there's nothing they can do to help Suzaku, and even remarking that it will be nearly impossible to find another pilot capable of matching the Lancelot. It becomes clear that Jeremiah used Suzaku's arrest to reinforce the idea that only pure-blooded Britannians should serve in the army, using it as a strategy to prevent future betrayals. After the ceremony, Rivaltz tries to convince Lelouch to go back to facing some of his old chess opponents. But to everyone's surprise, Lelouch agrees with Shirley, who had advised him not to play, and he replies that he has already found a much better opponent to test his intelligence against. Later that same day, Callan, Ogi, Tamaki, and Kento head to Tokyo Tower, as instructed by Zero. While waiting, they begin to speculate whether the previous call might have been made by Suzaku. Just as they're about to give up and leave, a voice comes over the tower's loudspeakers, asking Callan to head to the main counter because her cell phone had been turned in as a lost item. Soon after, the Tower Observatory receives a new call from Zero, instructing them to take a train on Line 5 to continue the plan. In another scene, we see Jeremiah speaking with Dithard about preparations for the funeral. Dithard remarks that Clovis's funeral had ironically already been prepared in advance. Now, they are also organizing Jeremiah's accession ceremony to reflect his newly elevated status. Right after, Jeremiah orders Dithard to also prepare Suzaku's transfer to the War Council. They then decide to fill the ranks with loyal Britannian civilians. And at that moment, Valletta warns that many 11s view Suzaku as a hero and might try to rescue him. Jeremiah, without hesitation, guarantees that he himself will execute anyone who dares. Meanwhile, Callan and the other rebels who had gone to Tokyo Tower are already inside the train, and during the ride, they receive another call from Zero. He tells them to look out both sides of the windows. On one side, they see the prosperous and luxurious Britannian city, while on the other, they see only ruins, where most of the 11s live. Then, Zero appears before the group and explains the reason for that contrast, since he wanted to show that the real fight was not against buildings or low-ranking soldiers, but against Britannia as a whole. He declares that until now, the Resistance's actions have been nothing more than a minor inconvenience to the Empire, and stresses that targeting innocent children is useless and stains their cause. The true objective must be to reclaim what rightfully belongs to them without spreading injustice. Callan's companions demand that Zero show his face, but he replies that they don't need to trust his identity, only his results. At the same time, elsewhere, we see Todo and his allies discussing whether they should attempt to rescue Suzaku. Todo ends up dismissing the idea, saying it would take nothing short of a miracle for such a mission to succeed. Meanwhile, Lloyd appears before Suzaku's cell, telling him that the people he cared about were not listed among the casualties of the Shinjuku battle, but also admitting that Suzaku's situation is virtually indefensible, since no one truly wishes for him to be acquitted. That very night, the streets are filled with Britannians as expected, but beyond that, thousands more follow everything on television. We then see Suzaku being transported in a heavily guarded convoy. The convoy suddenly stops when an automobile approaches. It's the same model once used by Clovis in Vita. We discover that the driver is Callan, nervous and barely able to control her emotions as she faces the nightmares head-on. The scene cuts to a flashback, revealing that only Callan and Ogi believed in Lelouch's plan. When the rest of the Resistance called it a suicide mission, Zero remained calm, assuring them he had more than enough resources to rescue Suzaku. Back in the present, the roof of the car bursts open in flames and atop it appears Zero, making his first major public revelation. Immediately, the nightmares surround the vehicle, closing in from above and blocking all escape routes. With a snap of his fingers, Zero unveils the very same container that had once transported CC, shocking everyone with his boldness and strategy. Everyone believes the container holds poisonous gas, and thus Zero uses it as a weapon of intimidation, holding the Britannians hostage. No reporter dares to get close enough to film him directly, but Dithard, determined to get the exclusive scoop, he grabs a camera and runs to the road alone. At the scene, Zero proposes an exchange. He would release the gas in return for Suzaku's freedom. However, Jeremiah categorically refuses. Minutes later, to everyone's shock, Zero loudly declares that it was he who assassinated Clovis. Immediately, all the nightmares raise their weapons, ready to fire, but then Zero approaches Jeremiah and threatens him, saying he could reveal to the public the truth about something called Orange. No one understands what that means, but everyone assumes it's some internal scandal that destabilizes Jeremiah. At that moment, Lelouch takes advantage of the situation to use his Gias, forcing Jeremiah to free Suzaku and help them escape. Thus, Jeremiah obeys the order and releases Suzaku. Although some guards try to resist, Zero takes the opening to unleash the fake gas from the container, creating panic and distraction. With this, he and the rebels manage to escape through the road, where Ogi was already waiting for them. Later, at the Resistance's headquarters, everyone celebrates what becomes known as the Miracle of Shinjuku. Meanwhile, Zero speaks privately with Suzaku, asking him to join his cause to destroy Britannia. However, Suzaku refuses, saying he prefers to change the Empire from within the system. It is then revealed that the supposed poisonous gas was nothing but a ruse, and no one was harmed by Zero's distraction. Nevertheless, true to his convictions, Suzaku returns on his own to face his trial, believing he must abide by the rules even if it costs him his life. That night, Nunnally hears on TV the news about the recent events when someone enters through the door. She thinks it's Sayoko, but is surprised to discover it's CC, alive and well. Meanwhile, in another part of the world, we see a desert battlefield, where a local army tries to resist with tanks, but is quickly destroyed by Britannian forces using their nightmares. Among them stands out a red model piloted by Cornelia, one of the Empire's princesses, who vows to avenge Clovis's death and captures Zero. Back at the Lamperouge home, Lelouch finds CC talking with Nunnally, and Nunnally innocently comments that she finds it curious they both have initialed names. She even jokes, supposing that CC might be her brother's girlfriend. CC, as mysterious as ever, merely replies that her fate and Lelouch's are intertwined, which surprises Nunnally even more, interpreting it as some sort of commitment. Uncomfortable, Lelouch deliberately spills some tea on the floor to distract his blind sister and convinces her to help CC clean up. Ending the conversation, he then takes CC to his room, where he finally confronts her. He demands to know who she really is and how she's still alive, but CC, enigmatic as always, only repeats her name and dodges the questions, throwing back at him whether he is enjoying the power she gave him. Lelouch admits he is, saying that thanks to the Gias, his plans to destroy Britannia are advancing much faster than he had imagined. When CC hears that Lelouch intends to use his powers to destroy Britannia, she asks if he truly believes he can achieve that goal with Gias alone. He responds firmly, saying he had already planned to do so even without powers, making it clear that his determination goes beyond the gift he received. Intrigued, CC remarks that he is quite an interesting type. Then, without ceremony, she throws herself onto Lelouch's bed. She begins undressing and covers herself with the sheets. And annoyed, he asks irritably if she really intends to stay there. Casually, she replies yes, and even teases him, saying that men sleep on the floor, implying she had already decided to take over his room and his bed. Lelouch protests, insisting that if anyone saw them together, they would be in serious trouble, but CC counters, saying that if she leaves, she will certainly be captured, and that hiding in his house is the best option. He insists, reminding her that millions of people are searching for her, yet she doesn't seem to care, and says she'll be fine keeping a low profile there. Still frustrated, Lelouch presses her again, asking how it's possible that she survived, since everyone saw her take a bullet to the head. But CC simply turns away, wishing him a good night, and falls asleep. The next morning, we see Lloyd talking with Cecile, and he comments that since Zero's appearance, various resistance groups against Britannia have begun mobilizing. Inspired by the mysterious figure, this has ended up generating instability within the Empire, especially because Jeremiah lost part of his authority after the Orange scandal. This situation also hinders Lloyd's own plans, as he needs stability in order to develop his research. Elsewhere, we see Todo discussing with a member of his group the Japanese Liberation Front, one of the largest resistance groups. The man insists that it's time to act, taking advantage of the confusion caused by Zero, but Todo remains calm, saying that the best strategy is to wait until they have more information about the enemy. Meanwhile, back at the Lamperouge house, we see Lelouch researching on the internet, analyzing data for his next plans. In his room, CC eats pizza casually on his bed, watching him. She asks about his goals, but Lelouch mocks her, saying it's curious that she asks questions while never answering his. She coldly replies that she's not obligated to give explanations. Even so, Lelouch reveals part of his strategy. The first step is to confuse Britannia. CC flips through a magazine and notices that Lelouch is already being sought worldwide. She warns him, saying he's under the global spotlight, but he dismissively replies that it means nothing, since he'll soon cause even more chaos. In parallel, we see Suzaku, who is unexpectedly acquitted at his trial, since there wasn't enough evidence to convict him. As he walks through the corridors of the government building after his release, he reflects, confused, thinking about how he was previously humiliated publicly and now was being freed without any explanation. As he walks distractedly, Suzaku hears a voice coming from above, and when he looks up, he sees a woman about to fall from a dangerous height. Quickly, she warns him to get out of the way, since she doesn't want to hurt him, and he reacts just in time, managing to catch her and clumsily fall to the ground. Right after, the two begin talking, and Suzaku asks if she's okay. The woman replies yes, and seconds later she says she needs his help, since she's being chased by others. Meanwhile, elsewhere, the Britannian army remains on high alert, not knowing what Zero's next move will be. To reinforce security, they hurry to prepare for the arrival of Cornelia, the princess responsible for the upcoming operation. Back with Suzaku, we see him walking alongside the mysterious woman. During the walk, she comments that they hadn't introduced themselves yet, and for a moment she hesitates, but then decides to give him a false name. Next, she observes that Suzaku is quite famous, since his face had appeared in several magazines after the controversy in which he was accused of being involved in the assassination of a royal family member. Curious, Suzaku asks if it was a lie, what she said about being chased, but instead of answering, the woman gets distracted when she finds a kitten and starts playing with it. She then hands the little animal to Suzaku, but the cat bites him, leaving him. Surprised, elsewhere in the city, we see Lloyd and Cecile inside a car. They talk about Suzaku, commenting that they're there to pick him up now that he's been released. Cecile is surprised by how quickly the decision was made, but Lloyd explains that it's directly due to Zero's actions, which completely changed the perception of the situation. Suddenly, the two spot Suzaku walking down the street alongside the unknown woman, and they're intrigued when they recognize who she is. Shortly after, we see Suzaku and the girl sitting together. She takes care of the kitten's injured paw and wonders if he likes cats. Suzaku replies that he does, but when he tries to pet it, the animal resists and runs away from his lap. He then completes his thought, saying he likes them, but it seems they don't like him very much. The woman smiles sweetly and comments that kind people often have that type of unrequited love. With its paw healed, the kitten walks away and disappears. Intrigued, Suzaku asks why she lied, saying she was being chased. Hearing that, the woman throws the question back, asking if he was truly worried about her, and he confirms that he was. Then, with a mysterious look, she asks that if that's the case, he stay by her side a little longer. After getting up, the mysterious young woman takes Suzaku by the arm and leads him for a walk, and soon after we see a sequence showing the two walking together through various places. They pass by a marketplace, buy food from a street stall, and explore the busy area. During the outing, they chat casually, and then we learn that the girl came from Britannia, and that until recently, she was just a high school student. She reveals that it was her last free day, and since she had never gone out alone, she decided to sneak away and visit Area 11. Suzaku comments that perhaps she would have preferred another company, but she smiles and replies that on the contrary, she's happy to be experiencing that moment precisely with him. Meanwhile, from a distance, we see Lloyd and Cecile discreetly following the two, analyzing each of their steps. Later, the girl asks Suzaku to take her to another place, and he jokingly bows in an exaggerated way, calling her princess as he accepts the request. But she soon becomes serious and asks him to take her to the Shinjuku ghetto, the place where the terrible massacre by the Britannian troops had taken place. Back at school, we see Lelouch investigating information about Suzaku at IAC. That moment, Callan appears and asks him about the mysterious phone call from the other day. At first, not understanding what she means, he questions her about it, and she explains that it was the call she received when she was in the bathroom with him. Pretending to remember, Lelouch makes a gesture of recognition, but before he can say anything, he notices Cecile walking nearby, just behind Callan. Afraid that she might turn around and discover the truth, he acts quickly, grabbing Callan's head suddenly, creating a scene easy to misinterpret. The problem is that Cecile, looking from one of the windows, witnesses exactly that moment and is shocked. This is that famous romantic comedy kind of scene. Embarrassed, Callan asks what he thinks he's doing, and Lelouch, not knowing what to say, tries to make up an excuse. He then takes Cecile to the school rooftop and harshly scolds her for walking around the campus carelessly, but she coldly replies that as long as she doesn't leave the school grounds, no one can capture her, so she can do whatever she wants. Annoyed, Lelouch calls her strange for walking around school like that, but Cecile indifferently counters, saying she's strange anywhere in the world. At that moment, she notices a student scratching something on the wall and asks Lelouch what was going on. He explains that he had used Gias on that girl, forcing her to draw a continuous line, and he was testing the duration of his power's effect. Cecile immediately understands and says that he wants to find out how long Gias can last on a person. Lelouch confirms, stating that he needs to know every characteristic of his weapon, otherwise serious risks will occur in the future. With a provocative look, Cecile asks if he isn't curious to try Gias on her, but then quickly answers herself, commenting in an ironic tone that she was only joking, adding that after all, they are accomplices, so she has no reason to expose his plans. Right after, the scene shifts back to Suzaku, who is still accompanied by the mysterious red-haired girl in Shinjuku. They too observe the destroyed area, full of makeshift altars in memory of the massacre victims. He explains that the ghetto was practically wiped out, but little by little, some people began to return. Suddenly, some visitors appear, wanting to take photos of the scene. They coldly comment that Britannia should have used even heavier weapons to destroy the place. Hearing this, the red-haired girl is outraged at such inhumanity toward the Japanese. Elsewhere, we see Jeremiah receiving information about resistance movements, and he contacts intelligence headquarters to confirm the data. They tell him that yes, the information is true, and immediately Jeremiah orders reinforcements to surround the Shinjuku ghetto. However, the officials at the center are conspiring against him. They decide not to forward the message. But fortunately, Valletta, who is close to him, overhears everything and decides to act on her own to help her comrade. Back at the ghetto, some members of the resistance confront young Britannians trying to take photos. They smash the cameras on the ground and order the outsiders to leave. The young Britannians, however, retort, saying that the 11s should not behave that way. This enrages the Japanese even more, since they refuse to be called 11s and reaffirm that they are still Japanese. The Britannian youths insist that they should accept their defeat, since Japan lost to Britannia. At that moment, Suzaku and the red-haired girl appear. They try to calm the fight, but one of the Japanese shoves Suzaku, knocking off his sunglasses and revealing his identity. Immediately, everyone recognizes him, and the Britannians comment that he is the alleged assassin of Prince Clovis. The Japanese, however, argue that it was Zero who did it, and that Suzaku is nothing more than a dog of the government. One of the Japanese lunges at him, but Suzaku easily subdues him. He explains that he has received military training and that they shouldn't be fighting each other. Irritated, the youths walk away, calling him a traitor. The girl approaches and asks if he's all right. Suzaku replies that he is. But on the other side, the young Britannians start complaining because their cameras were destroyed. They accuse Suzaku of helping the Japanese and claim that he should have eliminated them. This enrages the girl, who reacts by slapping one of them hard across the face, declaring that she will not allow them to treat Suzaku that way. Meanwhile, we see Lelouch with CC. He shares with her everything he has discovered about Gies. As she changes into her characteristic white outfit, he explains that the ability requires direct eye contact, but glasses do not interfere. He also reveals that the maximum range to activate his power is 270 meters, and he notes that during the effect of Gies, people show memory lapses, which leads him to believe that the power damages the victim's brains. In addition, he states that under the right lighting, even a mirror reflection can be used to activate it. Impressed, CC observes that he is taking the study of his own ability very seriously. Lelouch firmly responds that this is the least he can do. After all, his enemy is a colossal empire like Britannia. At that moment, CC questions Lelouch, asking why he is doing all this, and whether in the end he isn't Britannian himself and not an 11. She adds that the Britannian Empire is far too powerful to be toppled with just one Gies, but Lelouch shows no fear. On the contrary, he firmly declares that he is even stronger than the Empire itself. That's precisely why there will be no problem facing it. Right after, the hero begins to share part of his past. He tells her about his childhood, how he witnessed daily injustices against the Japanese. In parallel, we see Suzaku doing the same, revealing his own story to the mysterious red-haired girl. In the end, both Lelouch and Suzaku declare that they want to change the world so that such tragedies never happen again. Listening silently, CC tells Lelouch that he's just an idealist, but he corrects her, saying he's not arrogant enough to believe he can rid the world of all evil. That's why he is content to destroy only Britannia and create a place where he can live happily and peacefully with Nunnally. CC then asks what exactly his plan is, and Lelouch coldly responds. All he needs to do is end this struggle by defeating everyone and seizing power. Meanwhile, Suzaku shows how different he is from his childhood friend, saying that he wants to change the world in an idealistic way, creating a reality without wars and where people no longer suffer. Elsewhere in Shinjuku, Jeremiah suffers an ambush from his own men. They say they cannot forgive him for letting Zero escape, since he was responsible for Clovis's downfall. The soldiers comment that Jeremiah must be eliminated before Princess Cornelia arrives. At the same time, Lloyd and Cecile arrive at Suzaku and the red-haired girl. Cecile asks them to get into the A vehicle, since the area is about to become dangerous, and Lloyd quickly explains that Jeremiah's squad is in the middle of an internal conflict. and the ghetto is about to turn into a battlefield. Still, Lloyd doesn't miss the chance to tease, joking maliciously that Suzaku can resume his date later. But Suzaku pays little attention, focusing instead on the problem, asking whether this chaos might not be a perfect opportunity to collect combat data for the Lancelot. Surprised by the boy's seriousness, Lloyd admits that Suzaku is right. Soon after, Suzaku says goodbye to the red-haired girl, who tries to convince him to stay, but he insists, saying that the Lancelot can step in and stop the fighting, preventing more lives from being lost. Meanwhile, Jeremiah is dueling 4 elite soldiers. Thanks to his skill and experience, he manages to hold them off, but he complains about the cowardice of a 4-against-1 fight. His opponents respond that this way his family won't suffer reprisals if he is eliminated. They even add that Jeremiah will be remembered as someone honorable for accepting his fate. At that moment, Jeremiah realizes they truly intend to finish him off, and he tries to appeal to reason, but it's useless. His former allies insist that soldiers exist only to serve the Britannian imperial family. Then they all attack at once, determined to kill him. But before the final blow is struck, Suzaku appears, piloting the Lancelot. He intercepts the attacks, saving Jeremiah at the last second. Suzaku then orders them to stop immediately, reminding them that they must not fight among themselves, since they are allies. Everyone immediately recognizes the nightmare and realizes that the pilot is Suzaku. Without wasting time, the soldiers demand to know his intentions, asking why he was sent, and making it clear that if he dares to interfere, they will eliminate him without hesitation. Upon hearing that, Suzaku does not retreat, and he activates the weapons of his Lancelot, revealing its energy katanas. They are blades of pure light that the other nightmare models still did not possess. The soldiers were shocked by such advanced technology, yet they advanced against him nonetheless, and Suzaku, torn between rage and frustration, could not understand how he was being forced to fight against his own allies. The battle begins, intense and unbalanced, and in the midst of it, Jeremiah observes in disbelief that it is precisely Suzaku who is saving him. Shortly afterwards, Valletta suddenly enters the battlefield and joins the fight, further balancing the confrontation, and the tension increases, suggesting that the clash may end in a tragic outcome at any moment. Then, one of the recruits, desperate to complete his mission of eliminating Jeremiah, decides to sacrifice himself. He activates a special grenade that fires projectiles like a rotating machine gun, spreading destruction in every direction. Amidst the chaos, the girl dressed in red unexpectedly appears on the battlefield, and Suzaku, perceiving the imminent danger, immediately activates Lancelot's defensive shield to protect her from being struck. Soon after, the young woman steps forward between the combatants and firmly orders everyone to stop. And in that very instant, her true identity is revealed. She is Euphemia Lee Britannia, the 3rd princess of the Empire, and Suzaku is left completely astonished by this revelation. Outside, Cecile asks Lloyd if he already knew, and with his usual calm, Lloyd replies that he did, explaining that Euphemia rarely appeared in public because she wished to live a normal life as a student at the Intermediate Academy. Instantly, all the soldiers kneel before her, begging forgiveness for the confusion. Suzaku, deeply ashamed, also bows, apologizing for not having recognized her true identity. Euphemia, however, does not dwell on this matter. Instead of reprimanding him, she directly asks him to help her improve the situation in Area 11 so that no one else will have to lose their loved ones. Not long after, Princess Cornelia, Euphemia's elder sister, arrives in Japan. As soon as she learns what has happened, Cornelia harshly scolds her younger sister, calling her reckless. Then, Cornelia summons her commanders, demanding updated intelligence regarding Zero, a radical enemy who has become an ever-increasing threat. The next day, Lelouch is astonished to discover that Suzaku has been formally admitted to Ashford Academy, and to his greater surprise, not only does he join the school, but he is also placed in Lelouch's own classroom. Meanwhile, in a parallel scene, we are shown a mysterious location illuminated by the golden sunlight, carrying the atmosphere of a secret sanctuary. An imperial soldier ascends a staircase and informs the Emperor of Britannia that their manes of Prince Clovis have been properly delivered. With a disturbingly calm tone, the Emperor remarks that he had been speaking with Clovis, something that leaves the messenger utterly confused, unable to understand anything. Without giving further explanation, the monarch merely orders the acceleration. of a grand plan already underway. Soon after, the story returns to Ashford Academy, where the corridors are overflowing with gossip among the students. Everyone is curious about their scent changes, and with Suzaku's arrival at Ashford, rumors spread quickly through the school. Many students questioned his presence, recalling that he had been accused of murdering Prince Clovis only weeks earlier, and as expected, this remained a vivid subject in everyone's memory. Some wondered why he was there, while others defended the idea that if the Academy had accepted him, it was certainly because his innocence had been proven. Among the students was Nina Einstein, who displayed evident discomfort, reacting with particular hostility to Suzaku's presence. Meanwhile, Shirley, one of Lelouch's closest friends, was curious and excited to get to know him better. At the same time, Lelouch calmly stood from his desk and, without drawing much attention, subtly pulled the collar of his jacket, a discreet gesture but one full of meaning. It was a secret signal Hei and Suzaku had created as children, and Suzaku understood instantly. They should meet later on the rooftop. During that meeting, Lelouch thanks Suzaku for having saved his life, but Suzaku replies that he was merely repaying the favor from 7 years ago. He then asks about the mysterious girl who had been seen leaving the house. Lelouch, without hesitation, tells him that they were separated during the chase. Suzaku then asks how he should address him from now on, and Lelouch explains that Lelouch V. Britannia had died on the day of the invasion, and that now he lives as Lelouch Lamperouge. Suzaku, in turn, comments that it was Euphemia who arranged for his transfer to the school, insisting that a 17-year-old youth should live as a student and not solely as a soldier. Meanwhile, in another place, we see Euphemia examining the works of art left behind by the globes. Among the items, she finds an old photograph of Lelouch, Nunnally, and Marianne, and while observing the delicate strokes of her brother's paintings, she comments that he always used gentle colors, reflecting his equally tender personality. On the other hand, in the midst of military operations, one of Lelouch Vis Britannia's commanders discovers the location of a rebel group. He quickly sends this information to Cornelia's squad, and without wasting any time, the princess takes the offensive, personally leading the attack, and in a bold move, she departs on her own to pursue the remaining resistant forces still fighting under Zero's name. Back at the Lamperouge residence, Lelouch spends time with Sayoko, Nunnally, and also Suzaku, who had been invited. After a brief moment of relaxation, Lelouch surprises his sister with a special gift, and then Suzaku quietly approaches, taking Nunnally's hand, and even without sight, she recognizes him instantly. The three old friends spend the evening reminiscing about the past, and later Lelouch offers to wash the dishes. In the kitchen, he encounters Cece, who is observing everything carefully. With her enigmatic tone, she asks whether it is truly wise to keep Suzaku so close. Lelouch, however, is not shaken, and he firmly assures her that Suzaku is a friend, someone he can trust completely. Meanwhile, in another scene, Guilford releases Jeremiah from his cell, explaining that the courts did not find sufficient evidence to maintain his imprisonment. Even so, Jeremiah receives a severe punishment, losing 3 military ranks for having allowed Zero's escape. Back on the Lamperouge balcony, Lelouch and Suzaku speak once more before parting. Suzaku, with a serious expression, declares that perhaps it will be impossible for them to remain friends, since the circumstances in which they live might make such a relationship dangerously compromising. He explains that if people see them relating with such closeness, they will conclude that they have been friends for many years, which could lead to the discovery that in the past, Lelouch was a prince. He adds that he does not want to bring trouble either to Lelouch or to Nunnally. When Lelouch hears this, he becomes irritated, but in the end, the matter is left unresolved, and the next day, we see that the atmosphere becomes uncomfortable for Suzaku. Lelouch initially pays him no attention, just as Suzaku had requested, and to make matters worse, we see other students immediately stop talking whenever Suzaku enters the classroom. Yet the situation escalates even more, for 2 classmates invade his locker and recklessly spray paint all over his clothing. On that same day, Ogi calls Lelouch to confirm what had happened with the Imperial Opposition Group known as the Samurai. Blood. He asks Lelouch to arrange a counterattack, but Lelouch does not seem interested in that faction, giving few assurances and even considering cutting ties with them altogether. Meanwhile, in another part of the school, Nunnally speaks with Nina and expresses her fears regarding the 11s. Hearing this, Nunnally naturally feels distressed, realizing that her present classmates are fearful of her own childhood friend. At nearly the same moment, we see CC once again ordering pizza while Lelouch is busy taking care of Zero's uniform. Shortly after, when CC opens the door for the delivery, a kitten named Arthur sneaks into the house unnoticed. And if we look closely, it appears to be the very same cat that Princess Euphemia had cared for previously. Soon afterwards, we see Lelouch finishing the cleaning of his uniform and deciding to store it safely in his suitcase before CC accidentally soils it with food. As he packs everything away, his sister appears and invites him to share tea with her. Once again, she comments that she senses pizza around, and with that in mind, she teases Lelouch, asking whether he is not becoming chubby from eating so much of that food. At the same time, we see Arthur the cat managing to place Zero's helmet upon his head and wandering out through the door, though CC does not notice it. Immediately after, Nunnally asks about Suzaku, expressing her concern, and Lelouch only gives a vague summary of the situation so as not to alarm her. She then asks if he could not perhaps do something to help him. Suddenly, Lelouch enters the room and quickly realizes what has happened with the helmet, and he tries to stop the mischievous animal, but the cat escapes through the doorway, and without hesitation, Lelouch rushes out in pursuit. Shortly thereafter, we discover that Nunnally apparently summoned the student council, and when they all arrive, she explains that Akate has stolen something from Lelouch, adding that it must be very important, since he uttered a startled sound she had never heard from him before. When Millie hears this, she immediately decides to take part and throws herself into the task of capturing the mischievous kitten. Meanwhile, we see Lelouch continuing the chase after the cat, using his gias on any person who sees him so they will not remember what they witnessed. At that very moment, Millie announces over the school loudspeakers that whoever captures the cat will have the right to kiss a member of the student council. Shirley hears this precisely at the moment when she was about to dive from the springboard and sheens up, falling in surprise after listening to the announcement. Callan also hears the news and is somewhat alarmed when a group of girls suddenly emerges from the bushes shouting that essentially everyone is going to kiss her, whether she likes it or not. After that outburst, all the students begin to argue loudly and excitedly about which part of them could receive the kiss, and soon after, in mutual agreement, they rush out together with the goal of finding the cat and winning the right to kiss Callan. But leaving aside that somewhat suspicious detail, it is revealed that Callan had never kissed anyone before, and in order to prevent her first kiss from being something unwanted, she immediately begins running after the cat, trying to stop that unpleasant confusion. Meanwhile, we see that some of the female students begin to fantasize about what it would be like to kiss Lelouch, while another imagines what it would be like to kiss Millie. The commotion becomes even greater because several of the school clubs get organized and throw themselves into a frenzied hunt to capture the cat. In the middle of all this, Callan meets Shirley, and during their search for the little creature, the two agree that this entire reward story is absolute nonsense. Shortly after, Millie asks if anyone knows a detail about the cat, and it is then that Nunnally comments that she heard it said that the animal was limping, meaning its paw was injured. After saying this, she tries to imitate the sound of the cat's meow, and she releases a meow over the intercom system. When the students hear that sound, they become even more excited about the chase. Meanwhile, just a few meters away from the school, we notice Lloyd and Cecile listening to all the uproar happening inside the academy. Because of this, they grow concerned about Suzaku, especially Cecile, who wonders aloud if he will be all right. At that moment, we discover that in fact, they are monitoring Suzaku. Almost at the same time, Millie and Rivals mount a motorcycle, and he then asks the blonde if, being members of the council, they too could claim the reward if they managed to catch the cat. When Millie hears this, she answers, obviously, that yes, of course they can. And for that reason, the two accelerate and begin to search for the little feline. After a while, we see that Shirley and Callan are the first to locate it, and with this in mind, they decide to corner the kitten under a table, and they're about to capture it in order to protect their lips. It is then that Shirley decides to ask Callan whom she would kiss if she ever had the chance. In this way, we perceive Shirley's many insecurities, and she asks if it would be Lelouch. Embarrassed, Callan turns the question back on her, not understanding why Shirley wanted to know. While the two continue conversing, the cat manages to escape and somehow climbs up onto the roof. Soon after, Suzaku and Lelouch track the Kato a specific building and begin climbing the stairs. And at this point, it becomes clear that Suzaku surpasses Lelouch with ease, reaching the top in just a few moments. On the other hand, we see Millie, Nunnally, and the rest of the characters also arriving at the scene. At that moment, everyone realizes they have finally managed to corner the cat, and they soon notice that a boy is risking himself, climbing to a high point in order to try to catch it. That boy is none other than Suzaku, and while this happens, Lelouch also tries to do the same, but he slips and almost falls. Fortunately, within seconds, Suzaku uses the abilities he gained through military training and quickly descends to help him. At this very moment, the cat Arthur finally drops Zero's mask, which rolls to a spot where it was dangerously close to being seen. Witnessing this, Lelouch breathes with relief, for his secret remains safe. Immediately after, Suzaku descends with the cat in his arms and comments that it is the same creature as before. However, all the students had witnessed the courageous act of the young man, and they do not know exactly how to react. It is then that Shirley takes the initiative and thanks Suzaku for saving the cat, and she is not the only one. Rivals, Lelouch's friend, also steps forward to congratulate him, followed by Millie, who curiously wants to know what was that important thing the cat had stolen from Lelouch. Suzaku responds that he did not manage to see it clearly, but apparently, the animal was carrying something on its head and ended up losing it during the chase. After this, the students turn to Lelouch with questions. Suzaku explains that he had asked to descend first because he needed to search for something, and when Millie hears this, she becomes excited, commenting that Lelouch is probably hiding some embarrassing secret. However, Lelouch himself appears seconds later and dismisses all these theories, which irritates Millie, since she had been quite eager to discover some weakness of his. Then Callan asks Lelouch if he and Suzaku know one another, and at that very moment, Nina, visibly frightened by the accusations that had once fallen upon Suzaku, comments that he is an 11. But Lelouch quickly saves the situation by explaining that the two are childhood friends, and right after that, he asks Millie, as the president of the council, to request that Suzaku also become part of the group. Everyone is surprised by Lelouch's sudden stance, but he reminds them that at school the students are required to join some club, and seconds later we notice that Millie seriously considers the idea and ends up accepting it, since Lelouch is the vice president. At the same time, Nunnally, who was present there, comments that things are finally falling into place, and right after she asks the two to come closer, and in that instant, she kisses each of them on the cheek as a way of thanking them for having saved her. Thus, both Lelouch and Suzaku receive the reward, since Nunnally is also part of the council. Immediately after that, all of Lelouch's friends and council members warmly introduce themselves to Suzaku, everyone except Nina, who, as expected, still displayed a certain fear. Later, that very same day, the entire student council gathered to watch the funeral of Prince Clovis, broadcast on a big screen. Then an emperor gives a moving speech, but at the same time extremely exclusionary, to close the funeral. As expected, both Lelouch and Suzaku hear those words with anger, and right after we also see that Cece listens to that speech. She clearly realizes that Lelouch's true target is Emperor Charles. Shortly after, we are shown a flashback from 8 years ago, where we see young Lelouch entering the throne room where his father awaited him for an audience. As Lelouch walked toward the emperor, we hear whispers from the nobles commenting on the recent death of Marianne V. Britannia. Then, seconds later, Lelouch finally stands before Charles. He even tries to speak about the assassination of his mother, but Charles shows no concern for that, and furiously he declares that Lelouch has no value whatsoever, and therefore both he and Nunnally will be sent to Japan as nothing more than bargaining chips. Back in the present, we see Lloyd showing the Lancelotto Cornelia, who decides to officially promote Suzaku because of his recent success. She takes the moment to say that she was worried about him attending a school full of Britannians, and Suzaku agrees, adding that at the beginning he was afraid of being rejected, but thanks to Lelouch, that never truly happened. Right after, Cecile hands him a rice ball filled with jam, and then Lloyd appears, ending the day's work. On the other hand, at Ashford Academy, Callan is building the little house for the cat Arthur inside the club room. It is at that moment that Shirley starts asking indirect questions until she finally asks if Callan is dating Lelouch. Hearing that, Callan tries to deny it, but Shirley insists, making the situation much more intense than it should have been. While the two are talking about love, we notice that Milius in the director's office on a call with her mother, and that is when she discovers that she has been placed into an arranged marriage meant to recover part of her family's lost prestige. And outside the walls of the estate, we see Britannian forces surrounding the Saitama ghetto. Soon we discover that Cornelia organized this attack to recreate the same conditions of the Shinjuku battle, in the hope of luring Zero and finally being able to capture him. So determined is the princess to provoke Lelouch that she even broadcasts the attack schedule on the news, and even fully aware that it is a trap, Lelouch decides to go to Saitama anyway. But CC does not like the idea at all, since she fears for his life, and she even goes as far as to point a gun, declaring that she does not intend to kill him, but rather to shoot him in the leg to prevent him from getting into dangerous situations. In response, Lelouch draws his own pistol and points it at himself, proclaiming that without purpose he is already dead, and it is with that determination that CC finally yields and allows him to follow his path. In Saitama, the ambush begins, and the Britannian army opens fire against innocent civilians, while Jeremiah and his squad, however, do not receive permission to take part in the operation, since because of the recent incident, their loyalty is being called into question. In parallel to this, we see Lelouch taking on the identity of Zero. He manages to seize control of the enemy nightmares, and at the same time he makes contact with the Kyoto Alliance and succeeds in uniting the group to his cause. While the Britannian soldiers continue to advance through enemy territory, the resistance organizes itself to intercept and destroy them, and the battle, little by little, begins to turn in Lelouch's favor. But before the situation can spin completely out of control, Cornelia orders all troops to withdraw and ends the confrontation, and soon after, Lelouch decides to infiltrate among the retreating units in order to get closer to Cornelia. At this moment, we see that both commanders are extremely confident in their chances of victory, and back at Ashford Academy, we see Suzaku and Shirley talking about Lelouch. During their conversation, Shirley reveals that little by little she ended up falling in love with him, so Suzaku tries to help her by calling Lelouch with the intention of asking what he feels for Shirley. However, she does not like the idea at all and forces him to hang up before he can speak to him. The two end up arguing, and in the middle of the confusion, Suzaku falls on top of Shirley, while Lelouch successfully retreats, remaining infiltrated within enemy lines and positioning himself in Shadowland, on the outskirts of Cornelia's operations. Base. He tries to create some distractions using the radar to draw Britannian nightmares away from one of the bases, in order to prevent the next attack on Saitama. However, to his misfortune, none of his strategies work, and both members of the resistance and his allies are defeated. After consolidating her victory, Cornelia orders all nightmares to open their hatches to verify the soldiers' identities, and eliminate any possibility of an infiltrator in their ranks. At that moment, Lelouch curses Cornelia's determination and soon panics, as it is obvious he will be discovered. But fortunately, CC appears disguised as Zero, diverting everyone's attention to her. Taking advantage of the opportunity, Lelouch manages to escape and later reunites with her. During their conversation, he complains about the unfair conditions of the battle that gave him no real chance of victory. In response, CC scolds him, and then Lelouch promises that they will found a nation capable of never losing to Britannia. Meanwhile, we see Shirley, Millie, and Nina inside a train heading out of the Tokyo settlement. There, we discover that Shirley is very nervous because it is her first time participating in something like this. To ease the atmosphere, Millie tries to start a conversation, but soon after the train passes through a tunnel, and Nina's xenophobia quickly surfaces. Fortunately, Millie manages to calm her down, and shortly afterward, the train passes by Mount Fuji, which is partially destroyed and replaced by a massive metallic structure. Further ahead, the train reaches the Kawaguchi region where a luxurious hotel was built. Parallel to that, we see Ugi's group arriving in a stolen vehicle loaded with luxury items. There they meet Zero, who announces that this will be the new hideout for their organization. He explains that all those goods came from corrupt aristocrats who decided to support him. Callan, Ugi, and the rest of the resistance are surprised to see the hideout, which even has a second floor and a television. One curious member sits down, grabs the remote, and turns on the TV, and at that moment, everyone is shocked to see a news report that another anti-Britannia group called the Japanese Liberation Front has taken hostages in a hotel. However, it is soon revealed that the hostages are actually deserters from that faction, and this dissident wing is led by a man named Kusakabe. The news reveals that the group is trying to seize control of one of the vital resources essential for the stability of nearly every nation. If Kusakabe and his men succeed in dominating the factory of this resource, the Empire's balance of power could change drastically. Shortly after, Callan looks closely at the screen and suddenly sees the images released by the terrorists of the hostages. And among them are Millie and other important people. Meanwhile, Suzaku is among the forces mobilized against the resistance, and in Lelouch's group, everyone begins to debate the situation, discussing whether the front is acting out of zeal or trying to assert itself against Zero's position. At that moment, Lelouch receives a call from Rivals, but he simply hangs up. With few options left, Cornelia sends 3 nightmares to the hotel through a submerged supply route. The objective is to solve the problem by destroying the building's foundations, making it sink into the lake, but the front had prepared for this, and as the Britannian soldiers approach from beneath the structure, the resistance uses a modified cannon, firing heavy projectiles that destroy the enemy machines. The members of the front celebrate their victory and praise Kusakabe for anticipating their adversary's plan. Soon after, Cornelia receives the news that Princess Euphemia is among the hostages, though she assumes her identity has not yet been discovered. Otherwise, she would already have been used as a bargaining tool. Even so, Cornelia avoids drastic measures, fearing that any wrong move could reveal her intention to rescue her sister and expose Euphemia. She needs to act with absolute caution and precision, or she will lose the game. Meanwhile, in Ashford, we see CC talking with someone about Lelouch, and during their conversation she remarks that things are going well, but reminds them that she is not a guardian. Back at the conflict, Suzaku also tries to take part, but Ogi informs him that Cornelia did not authorize his entry, and meanwhile, Zero's group begins unloading the supplies and their former comrade. At that moment, Callan notices that Zero is watching the footage of the interview with Shirley's father and comments that he still doesn't seem ready to act. However, he believes he can no longer remain idle, since Cornelia will crush them sooner or later. Shortly after, Ogi shows up carrying boxes full of black uniforms and remarks that while the outfits look stylish, as a resistance, they should not wear them. But Lelouch replies that they are not a resistance, but rather knights fighting for a cause, and for that reason he tries on the uniform. At the same time, ignoring Cornelia's orders, Cecile prepares Suzaku to launch into action with the Lancelot. Meanwhile, the Liberation Front shows its cruelty by shoving a civilian out of the hotel, sending him to his death. Shortly afterward, they send a new threat. They will throw one hostage from the rooftop every 30 minutes until their demands are met. Even so, Cornelia refuses to legitimize the terrorist act. Soon after, a messenger arrives and reports that Zero was seen stealing Jeremiah's squad vehicle, and we immediately see the car speeding toward the site of the conflict. Still, Ogi and the others are not fully confident the plan will succeed, and later they end up face-to-face with Cornelia, who reveals her face and prepares to shoot Zero. After all, she seeks to avenge Clovis, who was eliminated by Lelouch at the start of the story. But before she fires, Zero tells her to choose between Clovis or Euphemia, since he had deduced that the princess was among the hostages. Using his knowledge from the time he lived in the imperial palace, Lelouch recalls that Cornelia always protected Euphemia, and for him it was strange that she had done nothing until then. He concludes that it must be because Euphemia was trapped inside the hotel, so he declares his intent to rescue her, and faced with this, Cornelia allows him to proceed. Lelouch's group then crosses a bridge and arrives directly at the hotel entrance. In that moment, Zero wonders whether the Kusakabe squad and the Liberation Front had allied with the enemy, but despite the uncertainty, he holds one conviction: things will definitely get more interesting. Meanwhile, Cornelia is already planning that once Zero is inside the tower, not only will the slaughter of the hostages be stopped, but both Zero's forces and the Front's forces can be eliminated at the same time. At the same time, she hands Suzaku his green Lancelot and orders him to rush into the tunnel and destroy the Front's modified cannon. They then explain that after destroying the cannon, he must also bring down the foundation block, so Cornelia's forces will have 8 minutes to rescue the hostages before the building collapses. Although this essentially means Suzaku is being used as disposable, he doesn't seem to care much. Soon after, we see a flashback of Shirley inviting Suzaku to join her on a trip, but he was far too busy. Meanwhile, in the hostage room, Nina's xenophobia flares up more than ever. She grows agitated and calls one of the front members an 11. As expected, that was not the place for such words, and the soldier reacts violently, shouting that he is Japanese, not an 11. Nina quickly apologizes, but the same soldier unfairly tries to drag Shirley, Nina, and Millie to another room, intending to execute them there. However, Euphemia stands up and reveals her true identity. She asks Nina if she is all right, and almost at the same time, in another room, Zero finds himself face-to-face with Kusakabe. The latter demands that Zero remove his mask, but Zero replies that before that, he wants to ask him a question. What is his true objective? What does he seek to achieve? Kusakabe declares that he wants to show the world that the Japanese are still alive, but Lelouch tells him they are outdated and have no future. In parallel, we see Suzaku fighting the front's modified cannon and dodging its blasts with ease, while Zero's group places small white explosives along the fuel pipelines. Soon after, Euphemia is taken into another room, and at that moment, Kusakabe attempts to kill Zero, but Lelouch uses his gias on him, forcing him to take his own life, as well as the rest of his soldiers. After this, the guards escorting Euphemia enter the room and find the carnage. Zero asserts that it was the front members themselves who committed suicide, claiming they realized their actions were futile. Next, Zero comments that Euphemia has not changed. And meanwhile, in another place, Suzaku manages to withstand the firepower of the machine gun and quickly prepares to fire against the cannon in order to destroy it. Elsewhere, we see that Zero's group enters into action, opening fire against the members of the front. Later, Zero speaks privately with Euphemia in the room, and it is at this moment that he reveals to her that he was the one who killed Clovis, the same prince who had ordered the execution of thousands of 11s, and Euphemia, shocked, asks him if he executed him for that reason. But Lelouch replies that no, he killed him because Clovis was the son of the Emperor of Britannia. Immediately after saying this, he drew his weapon and prepared to eliminate Euphemia. At the same time, Suzaku destroys the modified cannon and follows the plan by detonating the block of foundations. In that instant, Suzaku and Zero briefly confront each other, and just before Lelouch activates the explosives, this forces Suzaku to focus and save the survivors. When the hotel finally collapses, Suzaku falls into despair, lamenting that once again he could not save the people, but suddenly, Zero appears on a boat with all the hostages, including Euphemia, completely safe and unharmed. Cornelia quickly realizes that this gesture is not just a rescue, but also a way to prevent them from attacking Zero directly, so he reveals to his group that this is only the beginning of the true battle, and we can notice that all are dressed in black outfits and wearing the masks they had previously received. Immediately afterward, Lelouch presents his group to the world, declaring that from now on, they will be called the Black Knights. At the same time, we see the riot squad responsible for transmitting the announcements of the Empire being interrupted, and their transmission is hacked. In this way, Lelouch manages to send his message through television and radio, and after introducing his group, he reprimands the actions of the Liberation Front and declares that his true intention is to save the civilians. He affirms that he will tolerate battles but will never allow a crisis that would resurface whenever something similar occurs. Meanwhile, Callan questions herself about what is really going through Zero's mind, and right after Lelouch gives a speech calling the strong to fear them and the weak to join them, proclaiming that now the Black Knights are the true judges of this world. 2 weeks after the incident, we see Callan in her room, lying down wearing only her undergarments, completely exhausted and collapsed upon the bed. Suddenly she hears a noise and goes to check, and there she finds the maid who had fallen from a staircase and broken something. Callan orders her to clean up the mess, but soon the maid asks how her school life has been. Irritated, she ends the conversation and returns to her room, collapsing once more onto the bed. And at that moment, she tells the maid, who reveals herself to be her own mother, to leave. Meanwhile, in another part of the city, some men are loading boxes onto a truck, and we discover that they intend to divert the supplies destined for the refugees with the purpose of profiting in secret behind Cornelia's back. But what they do not know is that the Black Knights are waiting outside, and a few moments later, Lelouch and the Empire's forces invade the place and eliminate all those men. On the following day, in the classroom, Callan ends up dozing off and inadvertently mentions the Black Knights aloud in front of everyone. This draws the attention of Shirley and Rivals, who comment on what they heard. Rivals even goes so far as to suggest that she should listen to Lelouch's advice, and meanwhile, Cornelia begins reinforcing her troops after the latest events. She not only plans to put an end once and for all to the resistance, but also wishes to punish harshly the 11s if they attempt any other act against the Empire. However, she decides to allow the Black Knights to circulate for a while in order to ensure Euphemia's safety, asking the princess to avoid exposing herself to danger, and in a flashback it is revealed that Zero decided not to kill Euphemia, something obvious since she is still alive. After that, Euphemia keeps reflecting on the words Zero told her before and questions herself about what Suzaku would think of that. Meanwhile, in another part of the city, Callan participates in a student council meeting, and there she discovers that Millie, Suzaku, Shirley, and Rivals had tied Lelouch to his chair, all so they could dress him in a ridiculous cat costume for Arthur's welcome party. The most curious thing is that they also have an identical costume prepared for Callan, and shortly after we discover that because of the hotel incident, the three girls were constantly pursued both by students and by reporters, to the point that they could no longer leave school in peace. For that reason, Millie asks that all the members of the council remain together at school since they need the support of their friends. Rivals, upon hearing that, comments that her words sound somber, while Suzaku becomes so moved that he ends up in tears. To ease the mood, Rivals teases Suzaku in a playful manner and ends up knocking him over. The scene even makes Nina, dressed in a cat outfit, burst into laughter, and while all this unfolds, Callan reflects on the impact of the Black Knights' actions. Since their public appearance, the group has truly become what Zero had foretold. The weak began to gather around him, while corrupt individuals were eliminated one by one. Even so, Callan admits to herself that she wants to discover who Zero really is, but she fears that if that happens, he might vanish and leave the defenseless without protection. Back at school, Rivals realizes he no longer spends as much time with Lelouch as he used to, and at the same time, we see Nina starting to develop feelings for Euphemia. Elsewhere in the country, the Japanese Liberation Front initiates an intense debate about their next steps. All of this happens because the remaining leaders have begun to question the legitimacy of the Black Knights, not understanding why the people support them. Faced with this, the Japanese Liberation Front begins to consider taking their own measures, while Millie approaches Callan to hand her something. At that moment, Callan's stepmother scolds her in front of Millie for having stayed up all night. Startled by her presence, Miss Kazuki, Callan's biological mother, recoils and ends up breaking a vase. Shortly after, Millie and Callan head to the girls' room, where Millie hands her a high school graduation certificate. It is then revealed that the redhead comes from a mixed family, half Britannian and half Japanese. Following this, Millie vents, telling Callan that her father abandoned her mother because she lacked ability, yet still continued living in the same house only to maintain a forced bond with his ex-wife. This caused Callan to develop resentment toward her mother. However, we can see that the redhead does not completely reject her maternal origins, since she uses her Japanese surname when participating in the resistance, though of course, she doesn't reveal this detail to Millie. Soon after, Callan states that she has no problem living with both her mother and stepmother, but Millie questions whether she will truly be able to maintain that disposition, while promising not to tell anyone. Meanwhile, in Miss Kazuki's own room, which is filled with hateful graffiti, she quickly opens a drawer and reveals several pills and a medical syringe. Back to Lelouch, we see him and Suzaku talking about what happened earlier, already knowing that Suzaku had cried. Suzaku explains that the tears came because he was happy to see his friends still alive after the hostage incident we witnessed earlier. Soon after, Suzaku wonders why the Black Knights did not join forces with the police, and Lelouch replies that it probably would not work, and that if they tried to change things from within, as Suzaku suggests, they would end up getting caught in even greater problems. At this point, Suzaku argues that his only wish was to save lives, and that this alone should be enough, adding that if the Black Knights cannot accept true honor, then perhaps they are only being selfish. Shortly after, Shirley enters the room, and Suzaku takes his leave. Seconds later, Shirley asks Lelouch to go out with her, but Lelouch notices how much Suzaku seems to feel a strong connection to the Britannian people, since he always returns to the Imperial Army base. Meanwhile, elsewhere in the city, Callan receives a call from one of her resistance allies, informing her about the sale of a substance called Refrain. This substance makes people feel as though they are reliving the past through nostalgia. It is then revealed that Refrain is targeted mainly at Japanese people who long to remember their lives before. Soon after, we learn that the Black Knights are planning an attack against the transport carrying a shipment of this drug. Right after Callan hangs up the phone, she witnesses 5 Britannians beating up a street vendor, as no one dares confront. Them, Callan attempts to intervene, but Lelouch stops her, telling her that not only are they greater in number, but also that if she acted, she would face even more abuse. The following day, the same aggressors approach the pair and ask for their opinion. However, Lelouch does not even listen and immediately uses his Gias to command them to leave. Thus, the thugs retreat without resistance, and shortly afterward, the grateful vendor gifts Lelouch and Callan some items from his cart. Next, we see Lelouch and Callan spending time together at a park, sitting on a bench. And at that moment, Lelouch comments that despite all the problems, Area 11 has obtained some benefits under Britannian rule. He says that only to throw her off, since he knows Callan is the closest one to uncover his true identity. One wrong step, and she could connect the dots, realizing that he is Zero. With that reasoning, Lelouch adds that now the 11s have a better economy and even Britannian citizenship. Callan, noticing the falseness in his tone, asks what his real opinion is. Lelouch answers that he doesn't exactly have one, and then immediately says that perhaps it is better to live as an ordinary Britannian than to die fighting for justice. At that moment, Callan remembers her mother and is overcome with rage, slapping Lelouch and accusing him of being arrogant. She says she thought he was better than that and then walks away. But Lelouch only smiles, satisfied that he has accomplished his mission. Meanwhile, back at the redhead's house, we see Miss Kazuki, Callan's mother, returning to her room. She opens the drawer looking for her pills, but realizes they are gone. And entering into withdrawal, it becomes clear that she too is a refrain user, since the drug makes her feel trapped in the past. Elsewhere, we see Jeremiah and Valletta in a bar, and she asks if he really doesn't remember what happened when he met Zero. He claims his memory is faulty, and at that moment Valletta recalls that she truly suffered in the Shinjuku ghetto, and comments that she cannot remember the face of the teenager she saw on that occasion, but that perhaps they can still find him. In another place, the Black Knights prepare for the attack against the refrain transport, and most of the group is already beginning to trust Zero as their leader, thanks to the growing popular support. However, Callan still questions whether she is doing the right thing. But even so, when the time for action comes, Zero gives the order for everyone to enter combat. Soon after, the Black Knights advance against the gates of the complex where the substance is manufactured. They break down the entrance, draw their machine guns, and open fire on the enemies, and as expected, the criminals fire back. But Callan, piloting the Red Nightmare, clears the way, defeating several enemies and breaking through the next door. On the other side, she finds dozens of Japanese people, including the peddler from before, all under the effects of refrain. And among them is also Miss Kozuki, her mother, who hallucinates, believing she is in the past, living peacefully with her 2 children still as little kids, Callan and Naoto. Overcome with pain, Callan realizes her mother's terrible condition, and at that moment, a police nightmare appears and shoots at her red mecha, forcing her to retreat while carrying her mother. Zero, seeing that the police are collaborating with those who distribute illegal drugs, calls them the scum of society, while the police nightmare continues wreaking destruction. Callan tries to leave her mother behind, but she cannot do it emotionally. Her hesitation allows the enemy to immobilize and fire several times at her mecha. Fortunately, during the attack, Callan manages to protect Miss Kazuki, and soon the Black Knights arrive to defend her. Amid the battle, Callan orders her mother to run away, but weakened by the effect of refrain, she walks toward her daughter's red mecha, saying that she has always been there for her and always will be. This deeply surprises Callan, who understands that her mother did not stay because of attachment to her ex-husband, but to remain close to her daughter. The redhead, regretful, realizes that she had always treated her mother unjustly. Shortly afterward, the police nightmare tries to pierce Callan's unit, but she reacts quickly and counterattacks, and both collide against a shelf, leaving the enemy out of combat, the pilot probably dead. As the Black Knights rush to her side, Zero observes Miss Kazuki and recognizes her. From above, CC watches the scene and comments, "False tears bring pain to others, but false smiles bring pain to oneself." Later, Miss Kazuki is hospitalized, where it is discovered that she is still under the effects of refrain and that it will take a long time for her to recover. In addition, she receives a sentence of 20 years in prison, something unexpected even for Callan. At her bedside, Callan promises to change the world with the Black Knights so that her mother can live in peace. Sometime later, at the S Ford Academy pool, CC swims calmly while Lelouch analyzes the files of candidates who wish to join the Black Knights. Among them, he finds the Britannian Dieter Hyde. CC notes how much Lelouch's army has grown, but he explains that this happens because the 11s hate both criminals and the corrupt, who in general are the main target of the group. This creates a sense of connection between the Japanese and the Black Knights, and shortly after, Lelouch comments that the Kyoto group plans to send weapons to strengthen their struggle. Meanwhile, Jeremiah and Valletta confront Hyde in search of information, but he states that he cannot help them since he too has been demoted. Valletta then suggests investigating the Ashford Academy's archives, and together with Jeremiah, they head toward the Narita Mountains, where it is said the Japanese Liberation Front is located. Back at the Black Knights base, now with many more members than before, the group receives new mechas. Most of them are modified glass glows, called burais, but one of them stands out, the Gurin MK2, completely manufactured in Japan. When Saipoi say they arrive to prepare the equipment, Zero hands the keys to Callan and appoints her as the pilot of the Gurin. She tries to refuse, saying that he should pilot it himself to ensure victory, but Zero corrects her, insisting that it would be a mistake. She is the key piece for victory on the battlefield, and in the end, Callan accepts her responsibility. The Japanese robot is ready, and soon after, Ogi arrives bringing a report about a Britannian who is interested in joining the group. Upon hearing this, Lelouch decides to take a walk to the Narita Mountains. Shortly afterward, we see Zero entering a cabin controlled by the lazy members of the Liberation Front. There, he removes part of his mask, revealing only the lower half of his face, and then instructs them carefully to avoid any suspicious action. Meanwhile, the Black Knights, now equipped with their new abilities, begin to move around the mountain, still not understanding the true reason why Lelouch gave them this order. At the same time, we notice that Zero keeps his distance from the group, avoiding even radio contact, precisely so that he cannot be tracked. In the midst of this, Lelouch is surprised to find CC outside, while on the other hand, Cornelia and Euphemia begin mobilizing the troops to attack the Liberation Front. At that moment, Euphemia wonders if Zero will make a move, but Cornelia assures her that she has taken all the necessary precautions. Meanwhile, Nina confesses to Millie that she would like to personally thank Euphemia for defending her when the thugs tried to hurt her, but Millie replies that this is practically impossible since the social gap between them is enormous, and she also reminds her that in past times her family once had some prestige. In parallel, Lelouch talks with CC, who claims she is there to protect him, and soon after she asks why he decided to keep the name Lelouch but changed his last name, making it clear that he has not yet completely abandoned his past. But Lelouch counters with another question. Why does she herself use only initials as a name? At that moment, CC looks at him and replies enigmatically, "Snow is white because it has forgotten the color it was meant to be." Meanwhile, Cornelia continues coordinating her troops, and Euphemia supervises logistics and the medical camps. At first, she would not have participated, but she managed to pressure Cornelia into letting her observe the war up close, thus securing that position. While examining the panel of the blue robot, she notices another yellow one in the rear, and then she is informed that it is Suzaku piloting the Lancelot. Later, Tamaki resumes a Black Knights meeting, where they had scattered foul-smelling electrodes across the mountain, as well as a water dam. It is then that he finally reveals to Ogi the true objective of the mission. Ogi, confused, questions why they should not ally with the Liberation Front, but Zero interprets this as a sign of mistrust toward his plan. Meanwhile, Cornelia, determined to take revenge, promises that she will do whatever it takes with the Liberation Front to make them pay for their previous actions. Thus, she coordinates the encirclement of the entire area with her combat units. To the despair of both resistance groups, the Black Knights begin to doubt Zero, since he reveals that their only escape route is precisely to face Britannia's best troops. Gripped by fear, many panic, unable to believe they could come out alive from that situation. And you, do you think they will manage to solve this complicated situation? Leave your comments down below, and don't forget to give a like. If you enjoyed the video, comment if you want part 2. And that's it, I'm out. Stay with God, thanks a lot, see you next time.